Welcome. My name is Samantha Abrams, and I am the executive director for the March on Washington Film Festival, and this is my colleague.
Hi, I'm Patty First. I am the director of Ray-Ban Impact.
And together this evening, we're so proud to bring you a screening and robust conversation about Fannie Lou Hamer. I was sharing with some folks upstairs, we're so grateful to have this partnership and space at NYU DC because they help us bring all of us together in rooms like this to have these very rich and transformative conversations. And we hope tonight will be another example of that. How many of you are here by way of March on Washington Film Festival's email list? So I'm going to ask you one favor. Thank you to those who already have subscribed to our mailing list. To everyone else, please subscribe to our mailing list at marchonwashingtonfilmfestival.org. We have an amazing film festival coming up this summer that you do not want to miss. And this evening, we're excited together with Ray-Ban Impact to bring this conversation. Patty, can you tell them what they're in for?
Yeah, absolutely. So Samantha and I, probably a year ago, started talking about what we can learn from marching and women's power in the civil rights movement, and how do you apply that to today? How do you apply it to the Women's March and the activism that we're seeing today, and how do you really turn that activism into political power? So we're super excited today to have a fantastic panel after the film that is going to talk about exactly that.
Thanks again to our wonderful friend and filmmaker, Robin Hamilton, who produced this documentary. And the important thing to remember tonight from not this, the discussion, but learning more about Fannie Lou Hamer is that activism is real at any age. You can be an activist at 5, at 10, at 45. Education level doesn't matter. It really just depends on what you feel your role is in advancing humanity. So we hope you enjoy tonight. We want you to fully participate. And don't forget, marchonwashingtonfilmfestival.org.
Thanks, everybody. Hi again, everyone. I'm Patty First. I'm the director of Ray-Ban Impact. At Ray-Ban Impact, we believe that you can't change culture or strengthen the progressive sector without tackling race and gender equity head-on, and that is what our panel is going to talk about. So, panelists, come on up while I introduce you. First of all, I would like to thank Robin for making such a powerful film and for joining us on the panel today. Thank you, Robin. You're amazing. Also an Emmy award-winning journalist. So thank you. So let me introduce our moderator. To my left, the fabulous Erica West. She's a principal at the Ray-Ban Group, and she's also my Ray-Ban Impact partner in crime. She's been in progressive politics for more than 15 years and is the real deal when it comes to increasing diversity and addressing opportunity gaps in the nonprofit sector. She's been at the Ray-Ban Group for 2.5 years, which has flown by, I have to say, but came to us after stints at NARAL and the DCCC. Next to her is Robin Hamilton, who we have met and whose film we have seen. Thank you again, Robin, for being here. And next to Robin is Jessica Byrd. Jessica is the founder and chief doer of 3 Point Strategies. I love that title, by the way. Jessica, exactly. So 3 Point Strategies provides a home for electoral strategy that centers on racial justice and that is transformative rather than transactional. She's been named a woman to watch by Essence magazine. She has been named one of the most influential millennials by Rolling Stone and one of the 12 new faces of Black leadership by Time magazine. We're thrilled she could join us. Thank you, Jessica. And then last but not least, Jackie Payne. I have had the pleasure of working with Jackie Payne for almost a decade and watching her build the Move to End Violence from a concept into a powerhouse movement building program dedicated to ensuring that women and girls are safe, respected, and free from violence. But after the 2016 election, Jackie launched a new program very recently that she's going to tell us about called Galvanize USA, which is designed to understand and connect with the majority of white women in the U.S. who are not yet voting to advance the equity of all women and families. So can't wait to hear about that, Jackie. After the panel, she's got a lot to say. After the panel, we're going to have Q&A. And Erica, I will turn it over to you to get us started.
Thank you. Thank you, Patty. And thank you all for being on our panel and for everybody for being here tonight. So thank you, Robin, for making such an amazing film that is an impactful 30 minutes on an amazing woman. And so I just want you to kick us off by talking about how you chose Mrs. Hamer as your subject and maybe some of the things that you learned in the process of making this film that you didn't anticipate.
Okay. Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I always say this from the jump. The Rayburn Group has been so profoundly supportive of this film and this project because it has been a long time in the making. I first met Mrs. Hamer because I feel like she's in me. She's with me. I met her when I was in undergrad in college in North Carolina, and I had taken a class about women in the civil rights movement. And it was a feminist studies class, and I was appalled that I was just learning about her and that more people didn't know about her. And we had been assigned a book called This Little Light of Mine, The Life of Fannie Lou Hamer by Kay Mills. And it was one of the most exhaustive biographies I'd ever read. It just was incredible. And so I felt like I was hungry to know more about this woman. So I knew I wanted to do more about her, but I didn't know what that would look like. So I just gathered things over the years about her, if I saw a quote or an article or what have you. And then when I was in Boston, the Democratic National Convention in 2004 was there, and they were having a 40th anniversary of Mrs. Hamer's speech, historic speech, at the Democratic National Convention in New Jersey. And I was meeting all these people who had worked with her and who knew her intimately. And so I was getting their names and numbers. Fast forward, I decided I was going to do something in 2013. Lawrence Guillot was someone who had been in the jail with her. And he said, call me anytime. And then I found out he had passed away when I was ready to jump into the project. So I said, I can't wait any longer. And so I just gave myself a year. I just looked up all the people that I had been collecting info from and just did it. And it really had been just a labor of love. I didn't know where people were going to see it, but I wanted it to be my thank you to her. And I happened to just submit my film kind of on a fluke. And it was really thanks to Patty because I submitted it and nobody really did anything with it. And then she said, you know what, why don't you just pass this along to Robert? You know, and he had worked in Mississippi and loved Fannie Lou Hamer. And so it just kind of came to life that way. So that's kind of a longer version.
No, that's perfect. And it's really in the wake of the 2016 election that I think you were releasing this film.
Yes.
So can you talk about
Yes.
what that was contemporaneous to your putting this out there and us being in this moment, this dark moment?
Yes. Well, that's a great question because one of the things I remember very deeply was when I'd gone down to Mississippi. So I had no right to be making this film because I didn't have any money, I didn't have any connections, I didn't have anything. But I had scraped together my pennies and I had set up an interview with Dr. McLemore and Reverend Ed King. And I remember I was sitting in the Hampton Inn off the interstate highway in Jackson, and I was filling out a grant application. And it was the same time that the Supreme Court was gutting parts of the Voting Rights Act in 2014. And I just thought, oh, this feels like this is the right time. And so amazingly, I ended up getting the grant, and that helped propel my story forward. So when this film started making the little tour, when Fannie Lou and I started going around the festival circuit in 2016, it felt there was just this weird energy around it. And I'm just so thankful that I got to introduce people to her, because we need a reminder of what's at stake and how many people have literally shed blood for us to have the opportunities. And so I'm appalled at where we are today, not to be too dark. But I'm concerned.
No, we're turning a corner. That's why we're here.
Yes.
So on that note, so I'm familiar with Jessica, your story, and most recently, Jackie, your story, and the work that you all are both doing to organize women, people, in very different ways, and to give women power and voice politically in very different ways. So starting with you, Jessica, will you tell us what you're working on at 3 Point and sort of how all of that connects to what we're talking about here?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. At first, I just wanted to say thank you for creating this film. And, you know, for many of us in electoral work, and particularly Black women, I can imagine, like me, that she is just such a beacon of light and in many ways really a North Star. And so it does not surprise me that a Black woman took it upon herself to tell this story in such a rich way. So thank you very much. Yeah. I hope everyone sees it. So I started 3 Point Strategies in 2015. And, you know, I've spent really the last 15 years working exclusively in Democratic politics. When I was 17, I joined my very first campaign, but I always like to say that I was really born to like the first activist that I ever knew, who was my mom, and she was a poll worker. And so she made like $200 for working a 12-hour shift, signing people into the polls. And every single election day morning, my dad would bring me over to my mom to do my hair while at the polling booth. And so I always would ask her, like, what are they doing back there? What's that curtain? Why, like, what's going on here? And really those questions kind of led me to this campaign addiction that I could never get rid of. And what I loved so much about that experience with my mom is, like, we were poor. We lived in a working poor community. You know, I'm obviously Black. I was a young woman. We were told all of these things about the type of power that our communities were supposed to have, but people really treated my mom with a lot of respect and love and like admiration. And so I always felt like voting was this like great equalizer. And then I started to really work on campaigns. And I recognized that not only was I most often the only person in the room who looked like me or who had the experience that I had and was in that room because I really wanted to fight for people, but I started to recognize that the candidates that I really loved could not win. And that I was working really, really hard for Black women, for women of color, to run for office. I was doing this. I was waking up every day to fight really hard for my community in these really clear ways that people always tell you to do. And then we would lose. And as I was starting to really ask myself more and more questions about what it really meant to be engaged in a question about what we need to build a reflective democracy, Michael Brown was murdered in 2014. And I remember at the time, I was working at Emily's List, which is a large national political action committee that works to elect women. And I remember feeling like I had made it. I was like 27, and I'm like, I'm at feminist Mecca. I'm kind of good at my job. I just got a promotion, you know. And then I watched for pretty much 2 weeks straight as my friends were in the streets in Ferguson, Missouri, being tear gassed and being hit with rubber bullets and being stomped on by police officers. And my life changed. It completely changed that day. And I remember thinking, I want a home for movement electoral politics. I don't want to just walk in here and to take off my activist hat, and I don't want to walk into the streets and take off my electoral hat. I want both. And so creating 3 Point Strategies was kind of a continuation of the questions that I started asking in my mom's lab, which was just like, what's our place here? What's our role here? What does it mean for us to bring our wholeness into a space? And so at 3 Point Strategies, every single day, we work to elect Black women and we serve Black people. And so for us, that means that we are working with really incredible candidates who are running for office all across the country, including Stacey Abrams, who's running to be the first Black woman governor of Georgia. We're working with a Black woman who is running to be on the Supreme Court in North Carolina. Last year in 2017, we worked with 5 Black women mayoral candidates in what we called uprising cities and places where there were high-profile murders of Black people. And we ran bootstraps campaigns, like just straight up all about the people. And another thing that we do that we're really, really proud of is that we anchor the electoral work of the movement for Black lives. And so the question that I started asking in 2014 about what the bridge could be between movement and electoral politics is one that we're engaged in every single day. The movement for Black lives this year started a project called the Electoral Justice Project, which is essentially taking this beautiful ecosystem that really started in the streets over the last several years and figuring out if we could take the energy of protest and translate it into electoral political power. And so we plan to do that. And every single day, we are really figuring out what it means to lead in an authentic way that has the values of movement while also building the political power that Fannie always dreamed of.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Okay, Jackie, tell us about Galvanize.
Okay. Well, I'll say that this is my first outing as the Galvanize ED. So you guys get my initial spiel. You can tell me what you think. I'll tell you the sort of origination of Galvanize started for me in 2016 as we were watching the most xenophobic, anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, misogynist candidate out there, and the closer we got to the election and not seeing a full-throated rejection of him among voters, I was getting increasingly anxious and concerned, as I'm sure many of you were. And then when he won and now the news came out that 52% of white women had voted for him, it was like, it was world-changing for me because I've worked in gender equity for decades. And I thought to myself, how did I not know that this was going to happen? How did I not see that these women would accept this candidate, not hold him accountable for what he was saying and for his policies, and just reject him for this? And so looking at how 52% of white women voted for that candidate, I just thought, oh my God, we've got to do something about this. And I started thinking back about the 20 plus years I've been doing gender equity in this country, and I was looking at all of the policies I've worked on and how we have really hit a plateau. We have stagnated on almost every measure of gender equity in this country. 20 years ago, we were 52nd in the world in terms of gender equity in legislature, and now we're 101st. Right? So the rest of the world is getting better. We are just staying still or regressing. And it made me think about so I started looking more deeply into what was going on with these white women, because white women are 73% of the women's vote and 39% of the entire vote. White women are the largest voting bloc in this country, and we will continue to be for decades to come. So if half of white women are not disqualifying candidates who are outwardly racist, xenophobic, misogynistic, it explains why we're not getting a lot done, right? Why we're having this problem. And so, while I was running a program that's majority women of color, and I was really loving my life. And then I was like, someone's got to go get these white women. And I was like, who's going to do it? And then I was like, oh, no, it's me. So I decided, And I want to say that with a lot of respect. Like, initially, I was super angry. We were kind of talking about the Women's March and how a bunch of my friends of color didn't want to go to the Women's March, were really, really pissed off at the white women who were showing up for the first time. And they were like, how nice it is for you that this is the first time you've come to march. And I totally understand that feeling, but I had a different reaction. I felt like, okay, this is amazing. Welcome. Whatever has kept you, I think we know what some of the things are that have kept folks on the sidelines, but now there is a cultural revolution happening among white women. There is an awakening happening. And actually, the candidate for governor in Georgia, Stacey Abrams, right? She had this amazing article she was quoted in where she was talking about what's happening in Georgia. About how white women are suddenly really waking up and coming out and saying, like, we can't stay on the sidelines anymore. And so we are seeing this, a potential revolution. And so what I want to do is get in there and say, what is happening? What is the shift we're seeing? How can we tap into it, sustain it, and find the other white women who have yet to use their power for equity, for gender and racial equity? What will it take for me, right? It's my job. I'm gonna go get my cousins. For me to reach my hand out and say, let's go and let's talk about it, because I don't want to make the mistakes of the past where white women's feminism has not always been inclusive, right, and hasn't been about creating equity for everyone. I want to make sure that as we go forward, we are having folks really reflect on what's going on for them, what's going on in this country, who do we want to be, and then how do we get folks to start the transformation, to shift, and so that when you're out there doing your work, your candidates do win, because my cousins are necessary too for these candidates to win, and it's time to make a shift. So that's what I'm doing.
Okay. So picking up on that thread of the Women's March, and there's a lot of intentionality here and vision and work that's happening. The intentionality around the inclusivity of the Women's March is one thing that made it groundbreaking. So yes, there were numbers, millions of people marching in cities all over the world, but the fact that it was ultimately more inclusive than its origins and its beginnings was a very intentional move, and it was about bringing a lot of women of color into the fold in an organizing and strategy capacity. How do we do that in an electoral sense? So how do we make sure that November 2018 feels like January 2016 in terms of sort of just the sense that we all have something to gain here?
I'll jump in and start. So the way that I know Erica is we worked on a campaign together called the Democracy in Color campaign in 2016. And it really was to ask kind of this question, was that we were looking down the barrel of the 2016 election and felt a real fear that if we didn't get out our base, if we didn't energize the voters who we knew would vote the right way, if we just got them to the door, that we were going to lose and have really devastating consequences. And so essentially Democracy in Color was to say, we need, dear Democratic Party, if you don't talk to not only our cousins, right, but like literally the people who already live in our home, we're not going to win. And we were really met with a lot of questions about the fact that people should just do the right thing because Donald Trump was on the other side of the election. And so I feel like as we've seen the Women's March and really just a subsequent very inspiring last year, it has been because we've been unafraid to talk to our people. We can't be so busy pandering to people who don't want to be with us that we don't actually talk to each other about what's important to each other. I love the work that you're doing, right? And I think that it takes that level of intentionality. We have to organize each other. So many times we have these conversations, we come to events like this to get inspired, and then we never tell anyone about it. And it's really our job. And I think this is what the Women's March, this is how it made people feel, is we told our cousin, we told our brother, we told our dad, we told our mom, we were like, we are going because I'm mad or I'm sad or I'm angry. And these are the reasons why I need to do this. We took up space. And we were unapologetic about our demands, about what it actually meant to fulfill and to uplift the message of the Women's March. And I just feel like we have to bring that to our elections. And we are more progressive than ever before. We're more diverse than ever before. So if in any way we're scared to talk about the issues that progressive people care about, or that Black, brown, a beautiful multiracial coalition of people care about, then we're going to lose every single time.
Anybody else? Jackie?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about I was thinking about when we were watching that amazing film when candidate Johnson was up there, President Johnson, that white women have voted, the majority of white women have voted for the least progressive candidate in every election since 1952, except for two. One was President Johnson, and the other was Bill Clinton. In all the other elections since 1952, the majority of white women have voted Republican. And so this might be the point where you're like, let's not talk about them anymore. Let's go talk about you. But I think for me, it's important to recognize that organizing is relational. We can't be afraid to talk to people we love. And so I think that's a lot of the work that we have to do. And so that's when I think about how do we do this together? It's like, how are we in community? How are we working together? And then we go to the people that we have relationship with and we love. And one of the things that happened in Georgia in the special election in 2017, that was really interesting was that a lot of the white women who had not, okay, quick story. Right after Hillary Clinton lost, a bunch of people woke up the next day and were upset about it, right? They've been crying. They look like they've been crying. They went into these women in Georgia went into their school to drop off their kids. And for the first time ever, they recognized that there were other people who felt like they did, because they could tell from like their tired, tear-stained faces that they were also upset. And so for the first time ever, they recognized that they were not alone. And so they started organizing together, and they started this thing called the Liberal Moms of 2 different counties, R and C counties. And then they made these magnets that were called the LMRC. And they put it on the back of their car because they were so isolated and alone in this conservative part of Georgia that they felt like they needed to know that there were other women out there that thought like they did. And if they would go up to the grocery store, and see someone else's magnet, they would flip it over so that when the woman came out of the grocery store, she would see that someone else who believed like she believed was there, that she wasn't alone. And when I read that story, I was thinking about what world does those people live in? Because it's not my world, right? Like you're having to have a secret bat signal to say that it's okay to be liberal here, right? And to be so afraid to even talk about the issues, that you have to do it that way by flipping the magnet, tells me that we have work to do, right, in terms of being able to create a new kind of political dialogue where we can talk to people and say, like, I'm not sure that this is so right. I think that this has got to be different. And for me, like, that's part of the work, that as we're doing this together, that we're in sync and then we're bringing our people along.
And in terms of having things to risk and just feeling exposed, and that's a theme in the film for sure, right? You're dealing with people whose very lives are on the line. Can you talk a little bit about the balance in the interviews? You talked to Heather Booth. I mean, you talked to some amazing people who have been just huge in the movement and in organizing. And can you talk about the balance of sort of what they felt was at risk and then also something being hopeful? Because that's really where we turn the page on getting people engaged for the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very fortunate to be able to talk to the people that I did, Heather Booth, Dr. McLemore, Reverend King, and Miss Ladner, Dory Ladner. And it was interesting to hear what they said in terms of we have everything to lose, but we also have nothing to lose. Like, we're at this point where we have to put it all on the line. And in many respects, they really did have Mrs. Hamer as a model. I mean, she lost everything. She lost her home. Her husband lost his home. They had to, first of all, hop from different houses for a while. And then they finally got some money, some help from SNCC. And that supported them for a while. But it was really, I mean, they had their home shot up. And I think her attitude was, you know, what's our alternative? What is our alternative? And, you know, I think when you get pushed up against a wall to a certain point and you hit this point of no more, I think that's when you hit a point of no return. And it was so interesting when we were talking earlier just about everybody has a certain threshold for what they can and cannot take. And, you know, we were talking about what white women have to lose and their level of privilege and what will it take to feel like, okay, I've had enough, which is fascinating, that story that you mentioned, you know, in Georgia. You know, people are just, you have women who are just on the cusp of, I can't accept this anymore.
And just to jump in, I mean, I think what felt really important to me, and as I've been studying Fannie Lou Hamer over the last, you know, several years, is she really represents actually what I think Black women voters and candidates in many ways represents. This was a very poor Southern Black woman who in many ways had incredible economic injustice happening to her. We're talking about sharecropping, which is essentially, as they mentioned, as you created in the film for us so clearly, it's post-slavery, but it's still a form of enslavement. You know, she died of cancer. She couldn't have children because she had a forced hysterectomy that she didn't know about. Right? So this is also reproductive injustice. And then was brutalized by the police over and over and over again, and brutalized by her neighbors in Mississippi. And so in many ways, as we say that there's no one single issue voter, She's a complete embodiment of that. We need reproductive justice. We need economic justice. We need good paying jobs. We need to be protected from racist, horrific employers. We need doctors to actually take care of us. More Black women are dying in childbirth than any other time in history. You know, we need a full conversation about public policy in this country. And Fannie Lou Hamer is not alone in the fact that Black women movement leaders are also at the intersection of all of this as well. We are also being brutalized by the police currently. We are also being followed and have death threats, not just on the phone, but now online. We also are feeling completely isolated in workspaces. Many of us have to create our own businesses, right? We're the biggest entrepreneur population in the country. Black women entrepreneurs make up more than any women's demographics combined. That's not just because we're brilliant, although we are. It's because we literally have to build our own Wakandas to survive. This is a real symbol of what we're up against. And so for me, what hurts me so much about Fannie is not only that she died way before that she should have, but that she suffered. And I think that we oftentimes have an amnesia about our heroes, that she suffered and that was unjust, and that there are people suffering now and that's unjust, and there are going to be women who we don't give roses to right now who are going to die in oblivion after fighting for justice. And I just think that we have to get really, really serious about the world that we're trying to build. We need to take those women, we need to take our leaders, we need to protect them like their lives depend on it, because they truly do.
So this full policy agenda that you just ran down has every intersection with white women in this country. Reproductive justice, certainly economic justice, certainly understanding, even if we, even if we're in a space where the entire country isn't having conversations about police violence, it doesn't just stop with Black communities. It is the deepest and the most horrific there and the most historically entrenched, but it doesn't stop there. I'm a big believer in messaging, right? Message testing and all of that, not from the cynical view that I think we need to test messages to know what to say to voters to make them do what we want, right? But to really understand how people are really thinking about issues and to be in conversation with them in a way that they can absorb and participate with us and things that our candidates need to be able to say and bring into conversation when they go into spaces with voters. What is that piece, or what is that understanding that you think Galvanize can own or start to lay the foundation for?
So we just started doing some living room type focus groups where we're just talking with folks about what their experience is. And we're really trying to get them to look at their own personal lives, their personal experience. And one of the things, I started out super angry, as I said, after the election, and I realized if I'm going to do this work, I need to have some more humility around it and more love around it, and see the humanity in folks. And because no one ever changed by being, shamed or told that they were wrong. And that honestly, I had to take some accountability for myself around my own othering, like my own distancing from white folks in an effort to be woke. Like, how was I kind of running over here? And so I really had to do, I had some work to do for myself. And so I just want to say, like, going into it, the first thing is to go in with humility and respect. To acknowledge that these folks, I initially framed it as folks were voting against interest, and now and then there was a piece of me that was like, I know what the interest is they're protecting. It's the interest of white supremacy, right? And then I had to get to the place of being, what is really going on for these other humans in their lives? What is their lived experience? And one of the things that has been really interesting is to see that for a lot of these women, for these white women who are voting this way or not voting, they're living in the deep end of patriarchy. Their fathers, their pastors, their husbands, their partners, their brothers are all the most conservative voters in America. Their communities are conservative. So if they feel like life isn't working for them, that they're having to separate from everybody in their life. Whereas a lot of us who are voting progressively are surrounded by people who think like we do. So what is the work? What are the unique barriers facing white women if we're going to get them to address and have a more progressive approach to voting? I guess that's part of it, is really just understanding that. And I think the one other thing I'll say is that this Barbara Lee did some really interesting research in 2015 that kind of put together the ways that gender inequity are working to suppress white women's full voting power. And when she was looking at the combination of gender divisions of labor. So in these households, women are more responsibility for all the caregiving needs, right? Both elder care and child care. They have delegated the responsibility for political decision-making to their husbands or partners. So the man is watching all the news and then telling her what the news is. Because that's happening, white women are not feeling as informed. So both white women and white men think that white men know more about politics. Then white men are sure to tell women in the more dominant way how it is and who they should vote for. So all these factors together, combined with one last one, which is a responsibility for social relationships. So it's kind of like Thanksgiving all the time for folks. They have to constantly make sure everyone's happy and no one's mad at each other. And if politics makes people mad at each other, then their job is to keep the peace. So then this role of caregiver and peacekeeper, they're just completely delegating or suppressing their own sort of consciousness and confidence around politics. And so the question is, even as I say that, I run the risk of disrespecting their agency, but I also want to be clear about how gender inequity is working here. And I would be remiss not to talk about the defense of white supremacy that's also happening. Because white women are these are married or partnered white women, because their security is tied to the men who are this system is working the best for, they are defending that system because they're sort of under the wing of the men in front with them. And whereas black women, whether they're married or not, and unmarried women, they see themselves as their fate is interconnected with other women. White women, white married women, and to a lesser degree Latina married women, see themselves as their fate is tied up with their husband and their family. And so that individualism is really undermining, I think, what we're going for in terms of interdependence.
Wow. Thank you for that. That's really illuminating. So I would like to open it up to the audience for a few questions for any of our panelists. We've got some mics coming on the side, I think.
Hi, good evening. My name is Gwendolyn Harper. I just want to applaud you on a wonderful film about Fannie Hamer. I brought my boys with me to see the documentary. Well, I'm from a small place in a very conservative part of Louisiana, in northern Louisiana. And I've traveled the road on I-20 to go through Jackson, Mississippi, because it's normally the nearest international airport. And my question to you is, while you were down there doing your research, how were you well received? And what was your feedback from the community, basically, getting all that information that was not very favorable back in the 1960s and so forth?
Thank you. Gwendolyn, right? Yeah, thank you. Yes, I was on I-20. That's exactly where I was. It was interesting. I got a little bit of, on one hand, I was welcomed very warmly by some people. Her nephew, Eddie Fair, who was elected Hinds County tax collector for the past couple of terms, was very kind to me, and he took me around town. But there was something very interesting. There was also a bit of suspicion on both sides. So when I went to Tougaloo College, which houses a lot of her papers and some of her items from her home, they were very kind to me because they were interested in what I was doing. But I think there are some people in Mississippi who are African Americans who are resentful of the number of people who kind of parachuted from outside, came in, did stories, did whatever, and then just left. And a lot of them feel like, well, we were the ones left behind. So yes, you came and you stirred the pot, and that's great. But when you left, we were the ones still dealing with the death threats. We had to live the day to day. So there was some residual, residual energy from that, especially from this group called Veterans of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement. They were very kind to me, but there was a little bit of defensiveness. And then when I went to the Mississippi Historical Archives, again, which has some of her papers, the librarians were predominantly white, and they were not thrilled that I was digging through this stuff. And one of them said, I don't understand, how much more do we have to talk about this? There's so many other things going on in Mississippi history. Why does this keep coming up? And I just said, well, this is a woman that needs to have more attention given to her. So it was definitely a mixed bag. There's some people who are not, who just don't want to talk about it anymore. Their attitude is enough already.
Good evening. Thank you, Ms. Hamilton, for the film. I thought it was excellent and very well done for such a short film, 30 minutes. And my question is for Ms. Byrd and Ms. Payne. Ms. Payne, you made a statement. You said that no one has ever really moved to do something different because they're shamed, right? And so basically saying like, okay, white women, you can't shame them for voting for President Trump because that's not going to change how they vote in the future, is what I gathered from your comment. So my question to you, to both of you, if we're looking at Fannie Lou Hamer's legacy, how do we as everyday people in the community, how do we actually do community organizing, and how do we convince a 22-year-old mom in Southeast who voted for our current mayor, who's voted for Eleanor Holmes Norton, who may have voted for President Obama, and their life hasn't changed. It hasn't improved at all. How do we communicate why it's so important for them to vote and for them to get engaged in the electoral process and in politics when they've done it and they haven't seen any change in their life? Because Fannie Lou Hamer's legacy is not going to move them, right? And then what do you say to your white coworker, your 40-year-old white woman coworker who's your supervisor, whose life is great, and she's living in Fairfax County and voted for President Trump and hasn't seen any negative or positive change at all? What do you say to those two people in your work?
Yes, question. No, it's very clear. So you want me to start? Thank you for that question. I'll start. Because I oftentimes think, and living in DC the last 10 years has been a really important lesson for me as an organizer. Because I think that what you're talking about, these intersections that we oftentimes think of at the ballot, in many ways, going to vote in DC has been some of the least inspiring, elections of my voting life. And that has felt terrible, to go and have 2 or 3 things on the ballot, to know that you're going to vote for statehood, but that it's not going to matter because we don't have congressional representatives to actually make that happen, voting congressional representatives. But what I have noticed, though, and what I would say to this organizing question is that I am in community with the people in my building. And there are old black women there's a church that owns my building, and there are older black women who haven't seen me in a while, and they ask me how I'm doing, who they saw that I wasn't going out for Easter. They're like, girl, where's your family? What do you need? And I noticed that when I actually am in conversation with them and in deep respect for them, I also am more in deep respect for the community around me. So I start to notice that the Shaw Library actually allows homeless people to be in there. I actually notice that then they give out the phone number for people when it's too cold or too rainy, et cetera. And so being in my community and not treating it as being an outsider has actually helped me to recognize that there's more power than just voting for the mayor. that I also have the ability to listen to the needs of the communities around me, and also to be in deep community so that we can also do some self-governance and self-determination. And so one of those things, for instance, was when I started to notice that my building was being deeply gentrified after living there for 6 years, is I called my landlord and was like, what's up? We had the first white person who moved into the building called the police on me. And we need to talk about that. We need to figure out what's going on there. And so, you know, the answer to your question in a city like this is really complex. But I do think that organizing is more about getting a person to take one specific action. I think it's about being in deep relationships so that you're constantly in an exchange about what your needs are and what you want your community to look and to feel like. And so my hope for DC, as I can, continue to build here, is that we are continuously able to grow and progress those conversations because we know each other and our needs so well. And statehood is one of those motherfucking things, by the way.
When are you going to run? I really appreciate that question. First, let me clarify something. Just because I'm not going to shame people, I don't want to suggest that other people, don't want to say what you should do. I think that the truth is that there needs to be a range of strategies, and that in every effective movement, there is a far left flank that is really going after it. I lived in Johannesburg in '96, and I remember Nelson Mandela was, part of the military wing of the ANC. That was a little bit of a backup plan, right? Like, if you don't come along, we have a plan. Like, Nelson Mandela is remembered for saying, like, we got to all be in this together, and I'm going to make, but he also was part of the military wing. So I just want to say, like, there needs to be a range of people doing different things. I think for me, what my role is in this is to try to connect with folks and say, there's research. I'm trying to really learn, what do we know about implicit bias? What do we know about internalized sexism and racism? What do we know about this? There are strategies for getting people to reduce implicit bias. Calling them racist isn't one of them. And because they shut down, they become defensive, they won't do it. So how can I start doing this work that says, that is probably different from you? If your coworker voted for Trump, like, I don't know that I would ask you to go and sit down with her and talk about the impact on your life. Like, that's a lot of labor on you, right? But what I could do is talk to her and say, can we talk about what's going on? And what do I know from research might work with that woman? So if she has children or grandchildren, she might not be so invested in doing it for herself or see it for herself, but ask her what she wants for her daughter or her granddaughter. Like, and so there's scientific strategies about how people change that I'm trying to learn from and to be intentional about. But I would also say that it does really come down to, my job is to go in and say, like, we are cousins. I'm going to love you, and I'm going to sit with you, and I will be the one to talk with you, and we are going to have to work through this together if we want this world to be better. So, I mean, let me do a little bit of that. Tell me your coworker's name. You start your own business?
Okay. You want to do right here in the front?
I have a question for Jessica. When you take out the sensationalistic aspects of the story and look at political history, what can you learn from Marion Barry's comeback when he was, pretty much embarrassed in front of the whole nation, but came back to reclaim his seat, that you can apply to these other candidates to be able to effect the change that you want?
Absolutely. I've never been asked a question like this, so I'm really happy that this is my first. Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people won't stop. It does not matter how much you try to destroy a candidate, how much you smear their name. If the people want them, truly, it can happen. What I learned in these mayoral races, more than anything, we ran against either an incumbent or it was an open seat where there were huge Democratic Party-backed challengers. So these were all black women in major metropolitan cities, Seattle, St. Louis, Missouri, Charlotte, North Carolina, New Orleans, Louisiana, and Cincinnati, Ohio. And so they were these complex places where there had been a high-profile killing, there had been an energized base, but even outside of just what the Black movement was doing, there were real, tangible, I mean, Cincinnati is a hotbed of the opioid crisis, for example, right? St. Louis had a huge stadium coming that folks were worried would bring human trafficking, which for many of us, we know is also more criminalization on folks who are engaged in sex work, et cetera. So these are these really complex places. Every single person that we ran against at least spent $1 million against us. In St. Louis, she spent $2.3 million. We lost by 888 votes, and the only thing we did was canvass. That was the only thing we did. And so, you know, I know people who, when they talk about Marion Barry, they feel the most pride that I've heard folks talk about, right? I wasn't here, my family is not native to DC, but what I know is that when you believe someone loves you, when you believe that their public policy proves that they love you, you can see past a lot of things. And I think that there is a realness that candidates who truly have people backing them get to have. They get to have swag, they get to say real shit, they get to be with the people because they know that they can win. And I encourage all of us, as we're thinking about engaging in local elections, whether you live here or you have families in other places, is that candidates know when they're alone or when they're not. And when they're not alone, they're more brave, they're more courageous, they do more bold things. And so if there's ways for you to support someone, even if you think they're a long shot, I promise you that it completely changes the game. You're welcome.
Can you do one more? Right here.
Hello, my name is Rebecca. Pleasure to listen to you all. Thank you for the amazing film. I'll start by saying that as a Black woman, I often feel invisible. I think that's just a easy, honest statement to make. Like a struggle to be heard, to be understood, to be respected. And I heard that theme in the film when I'm listening to Ms. Hamer talk about her experience. And so thinking about the march, thinking about this lovely event where we're in the same room having a conversation, talking about the same thing, I'm also recognizing that this is not the norm, that in between these big moments, we're not talking to each other. Like I said, I'm sort of waiting for sometimes my moment. I'm fighting for that, and then it appears that I'm angry. My question is, what do we do to start the small conversations? How do we initiate that in a genuine way where we're actually listening to one another? What's the magic touch to really get us to, if we walk in the room, we may not even address one another. But if that is our reality, then how do we truly evoke change? So what strategies do we have on a daily basis to be more cognizant of the other people in the room, the other women in the room, the other races in the room?
This is hard. This is really hard. I think so many of us feel lonely when we're so much more connected than ever before. So I wrote down when I was preparing for this evening just a few calls to action. And I always imagine that if you came to this room, you got this email, that you wanted to see this film, that you're pretty connected. But I do think that there are a couple of ways that leaving here, you can start to feel more fed, both intellectually, but just also emotionally around this election and this politics. One is to find informal moments to have intentional dialogue. So one thing, when I got to DC, I actually felt lonely. I wanted to create a group of friends. And so I started Black Feminist Drinks and Dialogue. And essentially was just, I asked one of my friends to ask one of their friends to ask one of their friends. And we wanted 4 people total to bring a bottle of wine, and then we would just talk about whatever we wanted to talk about. But the only qualifications is you had to identify as a Black feminist. So we weren't going to be schooling you on feminism when you got to the living room. But we would school you on anything else. And it ended up 5 years later being a group of nearly 75 Black women who were banging down the doors to be in this space and just to be with each other. And that, I felt like, almost became a political home for me. like that I just kept going to that place to ask questions. And we would talk about really intense things, and we disagreed on a lot. And it was so nice to be able, in a calm environment with my glass of wine, to really be in challenge with each other. And so I would say to do that. That sounds really simple, but what I noticed was that people clamored for it so much that I'm like, okay, the happy hour isn't enough. The big meeting isn't enough. We need more living rooms where we get to just be together and to be hearing each other talk. And then I would also go even a step farther to challenge you to ask yourself, what is the political home that you want? Like, really, what does it look like? What are the walls? Like, if you are feeling disconnected from the party system, from some of the groups that are out here, what would that look like? And how could you start to build that for yourself? And to show up to a meeting somewhere, to go, to look for that type of community that you might want to exchange ideas. So many of us, we have a set of values, but they don't live in a house where we get to go and grow them and expand them and change them. And so what is a home for you? And I would love to invite you to be in the Movement for Black Lives home with us that we're building.
I'm just going to add quickly to that. You know, in coming to this presentation, the thing that I was most afraid that I would do was to disrespect the women who I'm going to work with, because in this environment, I would feel pulled towards othering them. That I would perform for you so that you would trust me, that I was the kind of white woman who you'd want working with you, that I would, in telling the story, be flippant. And I did it. I could hear myself when I was doing it. Maybe you don't think I did, but I did compared to like how I would like to be in going into them, into a place that honestly respects them and says, I believe that you are also a good person, that you want good things for your children, that you know that you're mostly watching Fox News, which is a totally different world than I am watching. When I, you know, like that I have to be a better person if I'm going to go into conversations with people and open their hearts and minds. And so part of it is on me. Like I felt myself doing in this space, and it's asking a lot of myself to like not make it easy. It's easy to be like, you know, to distance, to dismiss, to be willing to disregard those folks and just say whatever. But honestly, we saw what happened when, you know, we lost so much of Obama's legacy already because we've let it get to that. Like so much gets taken away. And I just feel like a big part of it is to choose to see each other's humanity again, which is asking a lot when your humanity is being ignored and people are voting in a way that suggests they don't care about you. Like, but I think the thing for us to do is to be able to listen to each other, to hear each other, and to, you know, once again, try to just be better together. But it's asking a lot. But so I just want to apologize also for the way that I did that here today.
No,
I don't think you have anything to apologize for.
No, and this is why. So I love, yeah, for sure, and transparency, and I love. Like, no disrespect to the gentleman in the room, but I love women's leadership because I feel like the strengths that we bring to the table in terms of our self-awareness and our giving space to each other and our leaning on each other's strengths are really shining through in this conversation. So I've heard no fault in anything that has been said here, honestly, and I think we've all learned from each other. And your point is well taken that these kinds of conversations don't happen in a lot of places. But to Jessica's point, we can be intentional about building them. And I hope that we will all carry a bit of that from this room and do more of it together.
Something real quick. Yeah. Sorry, because I was appreciating that. And I can't get a signal in here, unfortunately. But to your request, there's a group that has been kind of meeting underground, literally like DuPont Underground, and they created a group called Table Tribes. It was an app, and the app was used as a way to say if you wanted to have a conversation, I think over last year was really around race, just plug into the app and then you can connect with people, and they had periodic meetups, and I just can't see if it's still active, but just to say that was really a cool way to get together. And one of the meetings actually was at DuPont Underground with a real diverse group of folks that just came together just because it was a desire to do just what you were saying. So I think there are opportunities like that exist, but sometimes you just have to be connected, you know, just get on the list, if you will. So I'll give you a card and connect you if I can.
Thank you so much for that. Okay. Oh, one more question?
I just want to add, in regards to the young lady, excuse me, comment is sometimes you have to be the change that you want to see, because I used to think the way that you're stating today, and what I started to do is just get into action, and it can be as simple as they say, as Miss Jessica says, creating your own tea party, if you will, maybe for back a lot of words, but. But just say, okay, I'm going to plan this meet and greet, and we're going to go and scout whichever location, even if it's the park, it's free, it's public space, and just get it moving. But you have to activate yourself if you want to see that change that you want to see.
So I think that's a perfect note to just sort of wrap things up with a final thought from everyone. We started this conversation with the film. And so as we go forward and we look at the work of the next 6 months, 6 years, 6 decades, this is all cyclical, it is constant work. And hopefully we turn corners and change the landscape of our country, and we do move towards a more equitable future that is more reliably equitable through our elections. It can be either from your work in this film or for anybody. What is a lesson from history, from organizing, from marching, from an election that you feel connected to, that you hold as you do your work?
I'll take that. I'll say resilience. One of the things that I have taken away from Mrs. Hamer is resilience. I had gone to another event, and someone had said, well, gosh, what would she think about where we are today? And, someone else said, she'd say, well, get moving, keep going. And there's just more work to be done. That's just the way it is. And so whenever I have moments of wallowing, and I definitely have done my share of wallowing, I have to be reminded that that's not acceptable. She would never accept that. And so I feel like resilience, that's what keeps me going.
Nothing that we're experiencing is new. After every period of racial progress in this country since the Civil War, we've had a period of white violence that has attempted to fight that back. And that's what Fannie Lou Hamer did, was to say that as Black people were being invited to be citizens in the United States, that we were being met with brutality and violence. And that's exactly what's happening now. And so for us, I think that it's our job to be very, very honest with ourselves about at what point we are in that narrative and in that story. There was someone who was whispering to Fannie, I love you, but progress is slow. I love you, and I want y'all to have the vote, but girl, just get a job and do the thing. It'll happen, it'll come. And so if at any point you're uncomfortable right now, I want you to really interrogate what that discomfort is. Because progress doesn't have to be slow. Progress can be fast. One of my favorite comrades in the movement for Black Lives, Mary Hooks, she always says, our mandate for this time is to avenge the suffering of our ancestors, to earn the respect of future generations, and to be transformed in the service of the work.
I'm tempted to leave it there. I'll just say, I was at the doctor's office the other day, and there's a quote on the wall that said, I still believe even now that at the heart of it, people are good. And I thought, why does the doctor feel like we need to see that sign right now? And I thought, that's a political statement, right? And so I went over to see who the quote was, and it was from Anne Frank. And I thought, how is it possible that Anne Frank was able to say that, And it just made me think about working in South Africa and all these places where people are going through so much, and the ability to believe in the humanity of others and to make it just constantly put your hand out and say, I believe in you, let's do this. And I think, at least for me, I'm choosing now to let go of the easiness of being angry and hateful, and I'm going to try the hard work, and that feels scary and lonely, of of believing in people and finding ways to help them be their best selves.
Thank you all, Jackie, Jessica, Robin, for your work and your contributions and everything that you have done and will do for us all. Thank you all for coming and joining us. And please, as I would be remiss if I didn't repeat what Samantha says, come to another March on Washington Film Festival event and continue to follow Rabin Impact, and we'll have more conversations like these. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.